Hi friends. Last time I discussed lease modification in case of a lessee when it is treated as a separate lease. If you have not checked it earlier, the link is given in the description. You can check it. Today I will be discussing when there is a decrease in the scope of a lease, how the lessee will account for it, and when there is a increase or you could say extension in the lease term, right? So these are the two things today I'll discuss how the lessee will account for these kind of a lease modification. So let's first of all see what the standard says about the decrease in the scope of a lease modification. So here is what the standard is has mentioned about this lease modification. It says for a lease modification that is not a separate lease, at the effective date of the modification, the lessee accounts for the lease modification by remeasuring the lease liability using a discount rate determined at the date, and lease modification that decreases the scope, the lessee will decrease the carrying amount of the right of use asset to reflect the partial or full termination of the lease and recognize a gain or loss that reflects the proportionate decrease in scope. So there are two portions of the lease here. One is, so here we have a lease, the one example which I'm going to discuss there, I have taken the example of say 5,000 square feet of lease. And now the lessor and lessee agrees to reduce the scope of this lease to say 2,500 square meter, right? So now this lease is divided into two parts. One is of course 50%, which will which the lessee will retain, which will be there in the part of the original lease, right? So here the retained part you could say. And second 50%, where the lessee will account for gain or loss on the termination or reduction of the lease, right? So here we will measure the gain or loss, right? So let's understand this whole scenario with the help of one example. In Excel, I'll take that example. Let me just, okay. So here we have taken this example that lease is say for 5,000 square meters of office space. Lease period is 10 years. Annual lease payments 50,000 payable at the end. Incremental borrowing rate 6%. At the beginning of year 6, lessor and lessee, they decide to reduce the scope of the asset, and it comes down to 2,500 square meters only, starting from the end of the first quarter. So earlier it was 5,000 square meters in the original lease. On modification, they have reduced the scope to 2,500 square meters. Annual lease payments which are decided from year 6 is 30,000. Of course, now the lease payments are also reduced. And the incremental borrowing rate at the beginning of the 6 year is 5%, right? So this is the fact of the case. So these are some of the steps that we will follow. First of all, we need to know that how much will be the lease liability and how much will be the ROU as per the original lease terms, right? So original lease terms are given us that lease period is 10 years, annual lease payment 50,000, incremental borrowing rate 6%, right? So on the basis of these figures, we will calculate the initial lease liability and ROU. So this is how we have calculated. So these lease payments are given to us like 50,000 lease payment, present value factor at the rate of 6% because incremental borrowing rate is 6%. So present value factor of 6% is given here. And of course, if I multiply this lease payment with the lease factor, it will give me the present value of the lease liability. So this way, we have calculated, and this gives us the lease liability of 3,67,950, right? And on this, of course, we will pass the entry ROU debit to lease liability 3,67,950, right? This is the step one, that we calculate the lease liability and ROU as per the original lease term which is given, right? Now, of course, we have done the modification at the beginning of year 6, right? So then I need to see that before the modification, where does my lease liability and the ROU stands, right? So that means I need to know how much is the lease liability at the beginning of the year 6 and where is my ROU also standing, right? So of course, like, we will follow the amortization method to calculate our lease liability. So this way, so this is my lease liability, 3,67,950. This is the lease payment, of course, I'm making every year. And interest, 6%, of course, on the lease liability. This is the interest that I'll pay, right? So I'll calculate on my opening lease liability, I'll calculate the interest. And so my closing balance will come to like 3,67,950. That is the opening liability plus interest minus the lease payment, of course, gives me the closing balance, right? So this way I have calculated my closing balances. So on these calculations, I come to know that, in the beginning of year 6, my lease liability after all these payments, it stands at 2,10,545, right? Similarly, I'll calculate my ROU also. So ROU, the lease term is 10 years. So that means I'll depreciate my ROU over the period of 10 years on a straight line. So this is how I'll calculate my ROU value at the beginning of year 6. So initial value 3,67,950. So I'll divide it by 10 because the lease term is 10 years. So 36,795 is my depreciation then. So of course, this will give me, every year I'll depreciate, 36,795. So this gives me my ROU balance as on the beginning of year 6 as 183,975, right? Now, this is the liability and ROU which I have calculated for 5,000 square meters, right? Now, of course, at the beginning of year 6, we have reduced the 50% of the lease asset, right? We have reduced the scope of the lease by 50% from 5,000 square meters to 2,500 square meters, right? So that means what I'll do. So again, as I mentioned, there will be two parts of my lease liability and ROU. One is that, I'll reduce, and of course, on that, I'll calculate my gain or loss. And second is that what I retain, right? So first of all, of course, what I'll do, as per reduction, because now on the reduction, the lease payments are also, of course, reduced, right? 30,000. And the incremental borrowing rate is also given to me 5%. So I'll calculate, according to these modifications, what will be my modified lease liability. So this is what, here I have calculated. So now from beginning of year 6 to 10, that means the rest of the 5 years, my lease payment is 30,000 per month. And this is my present value factor as per, incremental borrowing rate of 5%. And this gives me the present value of my lease liability, that 1,29,900, right? Now, what I'll do, first of all, I'll calculate my gain or loss on the reduced portion. So that means on the 50% portion, which I have reduced, I'll calculate my gain or loss. So 50% of my pre-modification ROU, it is how much it is? It is 1,80,000, 83,975. 50% comes down to 91,987, right? Or 988 if I round it off. And 50% of my pre-modification lease liability, it is 2,10,545. So I'll take 50% of this lease liability. It comes to 1,05,273, right? So then now I'll calculate the gain or loss on this portion. So 5,273 minus 91,988, it gives me the gain on lease of 13,285, right? So this is the gain which I'll book in my books of account on the modification. Now 50% of course, now I'm retaining 2,500. So on this, I'll calculate. I have already calculated the rest of the modified lease liability, you could say 1,29,900 according to the modified terms, right? So now if I see that this modified calculation of the lease liability, this gives me a lease liability of 1,29,900. So this is my modified lease liability. Already the lease liability of 1,05,273, that is a 50%, which is still there in the original term, is already standing in my books of account, right? So 1,05,273 is already there in my books of account. Now this modified lease liability is 1,29,900. So that means the difference is of 24,627, with which of course I'll increase my lease liability in my books of account, and I'll adjust the ROU also, right? So my ROU will increase with 24,627, right? And 50% of ROU, which I have calculated, which is there in my books of account, is 91,988 plus 24,627. So this gives me the modified ROU, right? So this is the way we will do the calculation on the reduction of lease liability. So what are the steps that I have taken whenever there is a modification? First of all, of course, we will calculate. The first step is always that you calculate the lease liability as per the original term which is given, and ROU and lease liability you calculate, and then we will see that, what is my lease liability and ROU before the modification, right? So that is how we will calculate the ROU also and the lease liability. And then according to the modification, what is my new modified lease liability? So this is how we have calculated, and whatever the difference of the lease liability which is standing pre-modification in my books of account and new modified lease liability, I'll take the difference and I'll adjust it in the ROU. So this is how we do the adjustment of reduction in the lease liability. Now, the second case here, I am taking of extending the lease term. So here also we are doing the modification. We are just extending the lease term, right? Otherwise, other things remains the same here. So here, lease term is 5,000 square meter of floor. Lease term 10 years. So I have taken just the similar case, right? The only difference here is there I had reduced the scope, and here I've extended the lease term. So lease term here is 10 years. Annual lease payment 1 lakh at the end of the year. My incremental borrowing rate is 6%. And beginning of the 7th year, lessor and lessee agree to extend the lease term to 14 years. So from 10 years to 14 years. And lease payment will remain the same. There is no difference in the lease payment. My incremental borrowing rate at the beginning of 7th year is 7%, right? So again, we will follow the same steps. First of all, I'll calculate the lease liability at the commencement date. That is, as per my original lease term. So my original lease term is 10 years, right? So this is my lease payment. This is my present value factor. And so, of course, now I've calculated the present value of the lease payment. It gives me the lease liability of 7,35,900, right? Now, second step, we need to see that how much is my lease liability before the modification, right? So we have changed the lease in the beginning of the 7 years. 7 years, so that means we need to see that how much is my lease liability standing. So this, for the first 6 years, of course, I have calculated my lease liability. So my opening lease payments at 735,900. This is my lease liability, on which, of course, I'll pay the interest at the rate of 6%. I'll make the lease payment, right? So this will give me a closing lease liability, that is opening lease liability plus interest minus lease payment will give me the closing lease liability, right? So with this calculation, I find that lease liability at the modification date is actually 3,46,356, right? Now step 3 is that I'll calculate the new modified lease liability as per the new terms. Actually, there is only extension in the lease term, and there is a change in the incremental borrowing rate, right? So I have to calculate from the year 7 to year 14th. My lease payments remains the same. My present value as per incremental borrowing rate is 7%. Earlier we were having 6%. Now it's 7%. And this gives me the lease liability of 5,97,100. Right. So now if we see that my modified lease liability is 5,97,100. Lease liability already standing in my books of account is 3,46,356. So that means, I'll take the difference. So this difference comes out to be 2,50,743. That is 597,100 minus lease liability, which is already standing in my books of accounts. This gives me the difference of the 2,50,000. That means with 2,50,743, I need to increase my lease liability, and this, of course, I'll make adjustment to the ROU also. So this is how the modification of lease liability is done. Okay, so I hope this point is clear. So I'll stop it here today. Next time, of course, I'll discuss on the lease modification from the lessee side. So do watch the next video. You can also join our course, which we are starting on Diploma in IFRS from 28th May. The link is given in the description, so you can join the course from the link here. So thank you and see you in the next video.